In Lesson 3.3, Day 2, Examples 4 through 6, you'll be finding the slope of a line. The slope of a non-vertical line is the ratio of the change in the y-coordinates, or the rise, to the change in the x-coordinates, or the run, as you move from one point to another. It can be used to describe a rate of change. Slope describes how steep a line is. The greater the absolute value of the slope, the steeper the line. Slope, or m, is equal to rise over run, or the change in the y-coordinates over the change in the x-coordinates, which can be found by subtracting y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. y2 just means the y value of the second point minus the y value of the first point. x2 means the x value of the second point minus the x value of the first point. Basically, the slope tells you for every 1 unit you move to the right, how far up it goes. In example 4a, we want to find the slope of the line that passes through -2, 0, and 1, 5. So if we use our slope formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, what I usually do is just go like this. This right here is x1, y1, and this point here would be x2, y2. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to go like this and say y2 minus y1, or we start at the back end and go 5 minus 0 over x2 minus x1, or 1 minus -2. Five minus 0 is 5, and 1 minus -2 is really 1 plus 2, or 3. So the slope of the line that goes through these 2 points is 5/3. Slope is one of the times where if we get an improper fraction, we like to just leave it as an improper fraction because it helps describe as you move 1 unit to the right. As you move 1 unit to the right on the graph, it goes up 5/3 of a unit. Another way to look at this is like what we were doing in the last lesson. Rise over run. We rise 5 and we run 3. So the slope is 5/3. In our next example, -3, 4, and 2, -3, we're going to do y2 minus y1. So -3 minus 4 over 2 minus -3. Well, -3 minus 4 is -7, and 2 minus -3 is 5. So our slope is -7/5. M, remember, stands for slope. Now in our next example, y2 minus y1, so -1 minus -1 over 2 minus -3. Negative 1 minus a negative 1 is 0, and 2 minus negative 3 is 5. 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. So this right here is a slope of 0, which makes sense because as we move 1 unit to the right on our line, it doesn't go up at all. It stays right where it is. So the slope is 0. One thing that I also want to point out here is notice that this line is going upwards. If you're looking at it from left to right, it's going upward, so it's a positive slope. This one is going downward as we look at the line from left to right, so it's a negative slope. And this one, since it doesn't go up at all, it's just a horizontal line, it's a slope of 0. Now I do want to just quickly point out too that if I were to switch these 2 points around and have this be my x2, y2, and this be my x1, y1, I would end up with the same result. Like if I were to go 4 minus, I'll do it right here, 4 minus negative 3, I'm just subtracting in the other order, 4 minus negative 3 over negative 3 minus 2, I end up with 7 over negative 5. And it doesn't matter if our negative is in the numerator, like it was up here, or in our denominator, like it is right here. As long as you only have one positive and one negative, the slope is going to be negative because a positive divided by a negative is negative, and a negative divided by a positive is also negative. If for some reason you had two negatives, if you had a negative in the numerator and in the denominator, then your slope would be positive because a negative divided by a negative is positive. Example 5 says find the slope of the line that passes through negative 2, 4 and negative 2, negative 3. When we go to do this, y2 minus y1, negative 3 minus 4, and then you want to do that over x2 minus x1, negative 2 minus negative 2, negative 3 take away 4 is negative 7, and negative 2 minus negative 2 is 0. And anytime you try to divide by 0, that does not work. So this is going to be a slope that is undefined. And if you were to put these 2 points on a graph, negative 2, 4 would be right here, and negative 2, negative 3 would be right here. And when you connect those, what you have is a vertical line. A vertical line is so steep that we can't even define it. That's undefined. Where up here, the horizontal line had a slope of 0. Because as you move 1 unit to the right, you do not rise at all. You'll want to make sure you maybe have this in your notes, just a picture of what positive slope looks like, negative slope, 0 slope, or undefined slope. Or if you'd rather, you could make Mr. Slope Guy. This right here is the positive slope. This one is the negative slope. The vertical line, which makes up the nose, is our undefined, which is why we have a U here. And this right here for the mouth, this horizontal line, is 0 slope. The last example type is probably the trickiest in this lesson. It says find the value of r so that the line through 1, 4 and negative 5r has a slope of 1/3. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out by using the slope formula. We're going to say r minus 4 over negative 5 minus 1. We're going to say that that is equal to 1/3. The reason why we're saying it's equal to 1/3 is because it says right here that there's a slope of 1/3. So when we plug these values into the slope formula, it's going to equal 1/3. Now, probably one of the easiest ways to figure out what r is to use proportions. We haven't talked about that this year, but you may have talked about it in a previous course. So I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of what that is. For example, if you have 1/2, that is the same thing as 4/8, correct? And look what happens when we multiply like this. 2 times 4 is 8. And 8 times 1 is 8. Anytime we have two equivalent fractions or ratios, when we multiply diagonally, we'll always get the same thing. So what we can do over here is we can take this right here and say r minus 4 times 3, or another way to write that is like this, 3 times, then in parentheses, r minus 4 is equal to 1 times this right here. Well, negative 5 take away 1. Negative 5 take away 1 is negative 6. So this is really just 1 times negative 6. 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. Now it becomes an equation that we solved in chapter 2. In order to solve this equation, we want to first do the distributive property to simplify the left side. 3 times r is 3r. And 3 times negative 4 is negative 12 equals negative 6. Now add 12 to both sides. And we end up with 3r equals negative 6 plus 12 is 6. 3r divided by 3 and 6 divided by 3, we end up with r equaling 2. So if r was 2, this it would work out that the slope between those 2 points is 1/3. Probably want to pause the video and try the next two on your own. All right, let's go ahead and do y2 minus y1, negative 8 minus negative 6 over 5 minus r. And this time it's going to equal negative 8. And if you'd like, you could write the negative 8 as a fraction by putting it over 1. Let's go ahead and simplify this right here. Negative 8 minus negative 6. That really is going to have a value of negative 2. So now when we multiply diagonally, we're going to have negative 8 times the quantity 5 minus r equals negative 2 times 1. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Now we're going to go ahead and do the distributive property. Negative 8 times 5 is negative 40. Negative 8 times a negative r is a positive 8r. And that's going to equal negative 2. Now we want to add 40 to both sides. So we end up with 8r equals positive 38. And then we're going to divide by 8. And you get r equals 4. And let's see, 4 6/8, or r equals 4.75, or 4 3/4. In this example, it's going to be negative 4 minus 6 over r minus negative 2 equals a slope of negative 5. So we're going to write that as negative 5 over 1. Now I'd probably clean this up a little bit. R minus a negative 2 is really just r plus 2. And I would also simplify this. Negative 4 minus 6 is really a negative 10. Now when we multiply diagonally, we're going to have negative 5 times r, the quantity r plus 2, equals negative 10 times 1 is negative 10. Do the distributive property to simplify the left-hand side. Negative 5 times r is negative 5r. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. Now we're going to add 10 to both sides. Negative 5r equals 0. And then when we divide by negative 5, 0 divided by negative 5 is just 0. So r equals 0.